Right. Thank you, Pastor Hewlin, for that beautiful and inspirational words of exhortation. And you have truly set the atmosphere for us this afternoon. So thank you so very much. I now want to invite Councilwoman Toyia Tucker to come forward and to speak briefly about the upcoming 2023 Juneteenth celebration. And while Councilor Tucker officially represents District 4, she has proven herself to be an energetic, engaged, and passionate ambassador for the entire community. Councilor Tucker, let's welcome her.
Hello, thank you, welcome. Last year, we had our inaugural Juneteenth Jubilee and Unity Week. It was represented by over 30 organizations and individuals, and some of you are represented in this room today. On the 7th, we had our first meeting of the year, and we actually presented some good news from Mr. Oz Roberts, because he's been working diligently on one of our events, and that is the Clothes Story. I'm not sure how many of you were able to attend that last year at the Columbus Public Library on Macon Road, but it was excellent. And AFLAC provided nearly $20,000 to sponsor the Clothes Story. But this year we have great news. The library is actually sponsoring the Clothes Story. Yes, great news. And we will actually have a date put out of the events that will occur for this 2023 Juneteenth. But please look forward to it. I appreciate Kenise Wiggins. She put out some little flyers to have you save the date. June 16th, we will have our press conference, and then we will have events all the way until June 19th. And as I mentioned to some of my fellow committee members, you know, we've been debating on doing a parade, and thanks to my fabulous committee, we have pinpointed the events, and we will have that information put out. I appreciate every and each one of you who have donated your time, talents, and resources, and financial resources to this event. Juneteenth is American history. It's an important, one of the questions that was asked to me today is how can we continue conversations? We continue conversations, courageous conversations like we are having today in events such as Juneteenth, such as the Latino Festival, Hispanic Heritage Month. We want to make this an inclusive event. We ended last year with an amazing bike ride. It was a historical history bike ride on our Dragonfly Trail and Black History Trail. We had an amazing time, and we want to continue to allow this to grow. I also want to thank my mayor, because he believed in my vision. You know, when I got elected, I started off and I kind of probably gave them a headache and they lost hair. I think he's grayed a little more since I've been on council. But when I got elected, one of the things I wanted to do was share some of the experiences that I had while I was in the Air Force, you know, on just all these different bases at Langley Air Force, Virginia, and Stuttgart, Germany, and Alaska. And one of the things that touched me as a teenager was experiencing Juneteenth for the first time. You know, I didn't have that here locally in Columbus. So when I spoke to the mayor and asked him for his support, he wholeheartedly supported me. And he said, Toyia, why don't you do a Unity Week? Why don't you do a week long? You know, I came to you, asked you about the week long. And he said, let's do Unity Week. And that's how we came up with Juneteenth, Jubilee and Unity Week, thanks to our mayor and his support. So give him a round of applause. If you would like to volunteer, You can get in contact with me after the event today, but we are going to continue to do amazing things because in Columbus, we do amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Tucker. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you so much for what you do in the community. And please extend our appreciation to all those who work so hard on this wonderful upcoming event. Ben Moser has served as one of the key change agents in our community. And he has the very valuable gift of not just seeing things as they are, but as they can be. He has been on the leading edge, with community-wide initiatives to bring together great minds, great hearts, and boots-on-the-ground talents to address important topics such as homelessness, poverty, race relations, education, and health access. Now, without further ado, I am thrilled to present to some of you and introduce to others my friend, my mentor, my supporter, and my inspiration, the President and CEO of our United Way of the Chattahoochee Valley, Ben Moser.
Thank you, Gwen. And thanks to all of you for being here today. This is an exciting event, our third annual Black History Month panel. And this is where we get to celebrate Black history in our community throughout the month. But I think that we should really celebrate it year-round. And so, that's something that I would like to take away from today is that, yes, February is Black History Month. Yes, it is important to recognize the accomplishments, achievements, and contributions of African Americans to our community during this month specifically, but it should be something that we do year-round.
That's right.
And this is not just Black history, it is American history.
Yes.
And we all have a collective history together. And I think the more we can talk about things in those terms, the stronger our community will be and the stronger our country will be. And so I hope that that's something that we can take away from today's amazing panel that we're about to have here. So this time I'd like to ask our panelists to come up. Toyia, Norman, Asante, come on up. All right, thanks for joining us up here today. This is going to be a really outstanding panel, and I hope to get below the surface of some of these issues today. We can have surface level conversations sometimes that are important conversations to have, but I hope today as we move through some of these questions that we can dig a couple of layers deeper into these issues that affect our community, that affect our country, and talk about the core issue of equity in our community, which is central to United Way's mission and the mission of our region, certainly for our city and our mayor, our council. And so as we get into this, let's keep those things on our mind and on our heart. And certainly in the wake of what's happened over the last couple of weeks, this conversation takes on even greater importance. And we all need to be striving to do things to eliminate racism in our community. And so this is a part of that, but it doesn't stop today, it doesn't stop in February, it needs to be a daily thing that's on our minds and hearts. So with that, we will get into it, and I'm gonna pass the mic. This mic doesn't work quite so well, so I'll try and project, but I'll pass the mic on over, and we'll get into some of these questions. So our first question is for Dr. Hilts. So we'll pass down. Dr. Hilts, can you please share insight about the relationship between race and health access? How does inequitable access affect communities? And how is the community affected as a medically underserved area?
a lot of questions in that, right?
Please introduce yourself, your role in the community, and the organization that you work for, before you get into answering.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Asante Hilts, and I'm the CEO of Valley Healthcare System. On the flyer, you see that I was the program manager for West Central Health District here at Columbus Health Department, and I have recently transitioned over to Valley Healthcare System. And this topic that Ben is introducing is affecting us from a public health standpoint, whether I'm at Valley Healthcare or Health Department, all of us collectively, this impacts us from a health standpoint. So to dive deep, like you said, into this question requires us to look at the fact that since we're talking about Black history, historically, healthcare has been withheld from African Americans, and that continues to affect us today. Some scientists have named it and categorized it as a way for racism to have an impact on health, is that if you had your foot on the gas constantly at all times, what impact would that have on your car? That's similar to the institution of racism and how it affects your health. Because as a Black person, African American person, racism is constantly impacting you. And there was a research study that was done that showed Black women, African American women, who looked at what their education was, what their socioeconomic status was, and across all of those things, Black women still had a higher maternal death rate and infant mortality rate for their babies. It didn't matter how much education they had, how much money they had, which community they lived in. So it shows you that the institution of racism, those historical perspectives and the impact that it has on health goes beyond just socioeconomic status. And so the behavioral risk factor surveillance system is one of the agencies, national agencies, that tries to measure the impact of health in all areas, whether that be diabetes, chronic disease, whatever. Well, racism has never been one of those factors, and now we're trying to look at how racism actually affects health and really name racism for what it is.
Thank you, Dr. Hills. And as a follow-up to that, the United States is the only country outside of Afghanistan and Sudan where the maternal mortality rate is rising. Why is that? And you know, can you dive a little bit deeper into what we can do about that?
And not only is it rising, but the gap between that mortality rate for Black women continues to be highest across all of the races. Like I said, regardless of what the socioeconomic status is in the education, what community you live in, the impact to Black women still exists. So then we have to identify, how do we close that gap? What is it that we have to do to bring healthcare, make it more accessible, as well as look at the institution that's having an effect on Black women? Are physicians treating Black women the same way? We have had many stories, many studies that show Black women, regardless of their background, have a complete different experience compared to their white, Asian counterparts in the medical system. So you're relying on the system for your care, but that's also the system that can be making you sick. So a study was done that showed that Africans who come from an African country who migrated over to the United States had higher health outcomes for maternal and infant death rate. They had higher, more success. But once they stayed here for one full generation, it matched what Black African Americans in the United States, the negative health outcomes were. So it shows you what is, again, that institution, that historical perspective, the healthcare system is having an effect. We have to identify and address that.
Thank you, Dr. Hills. The next question is for Oz. And Oz, if you'll introduce yourself and your role in the community.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Oz Roberts. I've been here for a long, long time. I've worked at AFLAC. I've worked at AFLAC since I was 5. I've been at AFLAC for nearly 40 years. I produced corporate events for AFLAC for about 4 years or so, and most recently have moved into the role of historian for that great company. AFLAC was founded in 1955 here in Columbus by 3 brothers, John, Paul, and Bill Amos, and has had success not only here in Columbus, but really around the world. Japan, AFLAC was the first American insurance company in Japan. So that's something that's really, really remarkable, and it's a remarkable feat that we're actually there. But nonetheless, I was born and raised in Columbus, went to UGA, and you know, love this community. You know, again, I was reared here, went to Southern Junior High School, Hardaway, UGA, came back and began my work in television a little bit, and then at AFLAC. But I'm really involved and active in this community because I love it. You know, when I was at UGA, people would ask where I was from. I would say Columbus, Georgia. They'd go, why? And I'd say because it's an incredible place to be from. You know, so I think that, and that's the reason that I kind of love to give back to this community, because it's given so much to me, and it's got so much promise and potential. The exciting things that the city has to offer for people that come to this community is really exciting. You know, I've got some friends coming in from, I'm a member of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated, so Norman, and I've got some fraternity brothers coming in next weekend to celebrate with a fraternity brother of ours. And the plethora of things that we're able to do here in the city now is great. You know, we're gonna do this little pedal pub thing. I don't know if you've seen that. But you know, we're gonna do that and some, you know, the axe throwing, you know, whatever. But I think this community has a lot to offer. And again, we talk about sometimes young people wanting to move away from Columbus, but we need to figure out what it is that will enable them to want to stay and to bring other people into this community. So I think that's what we're all about. So, sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. This is a tough question. I'm just going to say it.
They're all tough, yeah.
They're all tough. I think, you know, looking through these, this one is particularly tough. But, you know, that's what we're here for, is to answer some tough questions. So, what are some of the ways we can address the reality of intersectionality of our community members? Addressing the issue of race and racism is difficult in and of itself. But how do we tackle multiple issues affecting folks at the same time? When you bring in race and gender, age, class, religion, national origin, sexuality, ability, etc.
You know, I think the biggest part of it is education. I think people need to be educated flat out, you know. And I also think people need to have empathy for others. And I think that's something that we may be losing or lost to some degree. If you, you know, we take the situation that happened in Memphis, the tragic situation that happened in Memphis. But if you think about the police officers that are there, and if you think about the situation that they were in, if they were to think about the person that they were hitting on being their brother, being their son, being their father, would they want to be treated that way? So I think if we think about all treating everybody the way that you want to be treated, I think that will solve a lot of issues. Here in this community, you know, I went to I'm part of a guys read program at the Columbus Library, where we go to school and mentor kids to help them to read, because reading is very critical. And we went to a workshop. We went to the opening introduction meeting, and they did a really neat exercise. And I was placed with somebody that I did not know, and we had 10 minutes to sit with them to figure out 10 things that were alike with each one of us. And if you sit up, and we sat there and thought about it, and we had to dig deep on some of them. But you know, for example, her husband's name is James. My brother's middle name is James. You know, we both love the theater. You know, we talked about that. So if you think about everybody in this room having something that's alike more than dislike, I think we'll all pull together and be able to help each other with that.
That's a great answer there. Does anybody else have anything they would like to weigh in on? Yes.
But I will say this, you know, this is kind of an analogy that I have thought about recently as well, is that if you go on an airplane, okay, and a lot of times you'll have a pilot that may greet you at the door as you come in. But sometimes they don't do that because it's closed. But when you leave the plane, they'll greet you at the door. But you had no idea who was flying that plane. You didn't know if it was man, woman, black, white, Asian, gay, straight, or whatever. You had no idea who that person was. But the mission was the same. And that was to get you from one place to the other safely. And that's what the mission should be for all of us, to create a safe place, a safe society for all of us.
Well said. Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in there, or we can go to Norman for the next question? We'll go to Norman. All right, Norman, please introduce yourself and your role in the community.
Sure. So I'm Norman Hardman. I'm a realtor in the community. I volunteer with different agencies and organizations. I'm on the Mayor's Commission for Unity, Diversity, and Prosperity. See you there, Mayor. I'm also with Kristen, I see you there with Better Work Columbus. And as Oz mentioned, I'm an alpha as well. So I'm doing a lot of grassroots things. My passion is really seeing a lot of the services that we see across the community being centralized in neighborhoods and areas, because the lifeblood of the community are the families. And so I spend a lot of my time doing that.
Look at, this is a tough question too. So Norman, many people believe if they are good, they can't be racist. And if someone has racist bias, they are bad. How do we overcome that good-bad binary, or can we?
Yeah, we tend to think in terms of Venn diagrams, right? You know, you got your polar opposites, and then you have your areas that overlap. And because we're trained to think that way in terms of side A, side B, we tend to think of problems in that way. But problems are often multifaceted. They're layered, like you talked about the question that you asked with Oz. So I think it's important to understand that we're complex beings. We all have some evil, probably a lot of evil in us, or the potential to do things that are evil. But then there's also things that are good. I think in this context, it's important to understand whether you're dealing with someone's bias, their personal preference, or you're dealing with true discrimination and racism. Because there is a level of diversity that's healthy for the community. We're all not going to like the same things. What you enjoy doing for fun may be different from me. What you like to eat is going to be different from me. What you like to listen to. And those are things that provide us opportunities to do things that are culturally different from the experience that we had growing up. And that's what makes it challenging. That's what makes our city more diverse and gives people, newcomers, opportunities to do diverse things. Those types of things are healthy. However, when it enters a realm of discrimination, when you start blocking opportunities for people, socioeconomic advancement, advancement in relationships, advancement in healthcare, advancement in moving forward as a collective in the city, now you enter a territory that we have to fight against. There should be zero tolerance for that level of discrimination, because you're hindering people from moving forward. You're hindering a generation of people from being able to accomplish something that you would want your children to accomplish. So just because you are different, or you're culturally different from me, or just because you have some different ideas, I should not allow that fear to put me in a place to where I try to block you from getting those opportunities. Talking about cultural diversity, I think it's important cultural diversity in the workplace is extremely important, right? Just because someone has facial hair doesn't mean that they're any less professional than someone who's clean shaven, or someone who has long hair that's nice and neat is not any less professional than someone that has straight hair. So those are opportunities, I think, for positive diversity, and then realizing that people are not all bad in that instance. However, we have to separate the fact that people have both good and bad from the act of discrimination. Because if that person is being a conduit for discrimination, then we have to realize that it's bigger than just that person. They're affecting our community. And so we have to make sure that we address that head on.
Excellent, thank you. All right, we'll go down to Councilwoman Tucker.
Yes, I'm Councilwoman Toyia Tucker. I was born in Columbus, Georgia. It was formerly known as the Medical Center. I spent most of my years between Columbus and College Park, Georgia, and I graduated from Carver High School in 1996. After graduation, I entered the Air Force. I retired medically in September of 2029. After that, I started a system administrator job at the military entry processing station. Yes, I got a lot. And honestly, I've been in Montgomery. Oh, Lord. 2009. Oh, Lord. I futuristic. Force, on our Air Force base. And honestly, I never, and it's funny because I'm listening to you talking about the youth coming back home. I absolutely love Columbus. When I moved to College Park in my 3rd grade year, this was like on the weekend. I came here every weekend, every holiday, summer vacations. So it's just funny that my 11th grade year, I ended up coming back and staying with my grandmother because my mom moved out of the school district. And I did not want to go to that school because it was a rivalry school from North Clayton High School in Atlanta, in College Park. But coming back home, when I left, and just being transparent, I left because I saw no future here in Columbus. I saw people that I went to school with, they were on cocaine, doing lines at the football game, in the bathroom. I mean, this is in the 90s. It wasn't the era of popping pills, but people was doing hard drugs. And I saw individuals, and even now, some of the people, there are true drug addicts that went to school with me. Beautiful, brilliant people, excellent athletes. But this area, sadly, it just felt like a trap. It felt like a trap. And I just couldn't stay here. I felt like I was in a sinking place, a sunken place. So that was the main reason. I actually started at CSU first, and I was doing ROTC, and I cried to my grandmother, I'll never forget. And I said, I just can't stay here, Mom. I said, I can't, because I didn't want to get pregnant, because I knew my future was bright, and I wanted to go in the military, and of course I'm young, young people do have sex. I'm just being
Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
So, I just went on ahead and joined the Air Force in December of '96 on my birthday. And I just had to share that because, I just want to piggyback on about young people and what do young people think. I can tell you, but I remember I cried. I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning crying because I thought that I was going to fail. And can you imagine how many of our young people feel like they're going to fail if they stay here or if they come back? You know what I'm saying? What type of opportunities that we can extend to them? Those are true issues that we have, here in Columbus and in this region. So I'm not gonna go.
That's a perfect segue into the question for you, our first question for you, which is how do we lower those barriers? We have the community school strategy at United Way, Community Schools United. A lot of our Community Schools United team members are here today, where we're constantly focused on lowering barriers to education, and really with the schools we're working in, primarily for students and families of color. So what are some things that we can do to be proactive about lowering those barriers and creating educational equity in our society?
Well, first of all, I have to give it up to Pam Romero and Jarvis Hamilton and all of the community schools, individuals who work with Community Schools United, because they do an excellent job. It's an extension. So it's really an extension of the school system and also the home front, because we know that a lot of our parents don't have the tools necessary to actually, parent. I mean, unfortunately, it's true. And I know we're going to the question, but I just want to give an example. My kid's grandmother grew up in Selma, Alabama. In the 8th grade, she got pregnant with her first child. In the 8th grade, I'm gonna repeat that. In the 8th grade, she got pregnant with her first child. Now, this is post-slavery. 8th graders should not be getting pregnant with your first child. By the 9th grade, she was married. The 9th grade. At that time, it was no more education for her. How many kids do you know right now in Columbus, Georgia, have become pregnant in the 8th grade? I'm sure some of you know some, because I do. We have a lot of barriers, but it is opportunities such as Community Schools United that can go a little deeper than maybe our teachers, you know what I'm saying, our educators, our counselors, because our kids that are here locally are carrying baggage that most adults don't carry. They're carrying parents that probably are addicted to drugs, probably are prostituting, working multiple jobs, and raising their siblings. Raising. My grandmother, when I left here my third grade year, my mom graduated college. And my grandmother raised me while my mom was in college. However, my grandmother worked a full-time job. So she was at work from 3 p.m. to about 2 a.m. on Fort Benning. So what did that mean for little Toyia Wynn at the time? That meant Toyia Wynn had to come home, latchkey kid, fix dinner for her big older uncle who did not cook. And I was a second grader, and I'm for real cooking. I'm like chicken and rice and beans and everything. I'm cooking. These are barriers that we have and that we don't necessarily talk about, and we need to talk about more in these courageous conversations. But not only that, it's when we mention equity and what our schools have. Our educators sometimes are overwhelmed because they are the counselor, the mother, the father, the grandmother, the auntie, the cousin, the friend, the babysitter. They're everything. And this is causing, sadly, problems within our education system because we don't want to be honest about the resources or the stressors that our schools endure every day. So I definitely thank community schools because they provide really kind of like a safety place for our kids and also the parents and even our educators.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
If I can piggyback on that.
Yes, absolutely. And the next question is for you, too.
Oh, gosh.
That works out perfect.
Well, so I'm going to read this because I think it's very important to make sure they get it right. Talking about education, Brown versus the Board of Education, Topeka. You all know about that, correct? It was in 1954, this milestone decision, the Supreme Court ruled that separating children in public schools on the basis of race was unconstitutional. That was in 1954. It signaled the end of legalized racial segregation in the schools of the United States, overruling the separate but equal principle set forth in the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson case. Well, the sad part of this is that, has anybody heard of the Southern Manifesto by chance? Well, the Southern Manifesto states, if you've not heard of it, Howard Smith of Virginia, chairman of the Rules Committee, introduced the Southern Manifesto in a speech on the House floor, formally titled the Declaration of Constitutional Principles. It was signed by 82 representatives and 19 senators, roughly 1/5 of the membership of Congress, and all of the states that had once composed the Confederacy. It marked a moment of Southern defiance against the Supreme Court's 1954 landmark Brown versus Board of Education Topeka decision, which deemed that schools facilities for blacks and white children are inherently unequal. The manifesto attacked Brown as an abuse of judicial power that trespasses upon states' rights. It urged Southerners to exhaust all lawful means to resist the chaos and confusion that will result from school desegregation. What that was saying is that obviously they were trying to still keep things separated so that they can actually treat things differently, treat different schools differently. And and I'm all about education because I think in the situation again, my disclaimer is that my opinions are my own. Are my own. In the situation in Florida where the governor is watering down, trying to get rid of AP African American Studies in school, to me is horrendous. Because if you don't know your past, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think the problem is that learning about something only broadens your horizon. It only allows you to gain knowledge. So just to try to keep people from learning about stuff, learning about things, is not really making them a better people. You know, so I think that sadly, you know, I think well, thank you.
You already answered the question without me asking it. How can we learn from our past?
Sure.
Move forward in a better way.
Sure. But I will say, you know, Ms. Bunn is here from the Columbus Library, Columbus Bunn. And hey, Ms. Bunn. And we were talking about Mildred Terry, who was the first, we think, African-American librarian in the city, which the 4th Avenue Library is named for now. Again, so talking about things that were bad, potentially, because African-Americans could not go to the Bradley Library. We were talking about that before, and so the 4th Avenue Library was set up as a safe place for African-Americans to go and get books and to learn. And thank goodness, I'm on the library board, so we are actually building the need funds for the South Columbus Library that we're actually going to build. So please donate to the South Columbus Library. This is important for South Columbus as well, to have a facility that meets the needs of the kids in that area as well. But the 4th Avenue Library, now the Mildred Terry Library, was a safe haven for the people in that area. And it is now an incredible facility. So if you've not had a chance to go by there and see the Mildred Terry Library, please go by there. Ms. Bud and her staff are amazing people there. But I think it's important that we, so that situation potentially was a negative one, and now is made for good. So I think that's actually great. And one other thing that I was going to talk about, you know, this kind of leads into Norman's situation with the real estate, was in 1958, when Dr. Martin Luther King came to Columbus to speak. He spoke in the Masonic Temple because some of the churches were fearful of having Dr. King to come and speak. So the Masonic Temple actually came and was able to allow him to speak. And at the time, the building was structured a little bit different. It had a flat roof. So the Klan knew that Dr. King was going to be there. So they actually, the guys from the Masonic Temple were actually on top of the roof, and when the Klan saw them coming, they bypassed the Masonic Temple where Dr. King was speaking, and actually went and bombed another woman's house, Miss S.M.A. Ellison, who had just purchased a home on the edge of a white neighborhood. And I think the home was purchased by was sold to her by a white family. And so they went and bombed her house because she was in that neighborhood. Well, sadly, those situations are not gone. I have a good friend of mine right now who told me about a month and a half ago, he has the means to go out and buy some land up, I think it's up in Harris County, North Columbus, somewhere. And sadly, when the neighbors saw him building there, they came over and was destroying his construction because they did not want him to be there. And that's today. So again, but if they got to know him as a person, they would know he is an amazing person. So that's why I go back to people getting to know each other, you know, and to learn about the differences that people have that will only make them a better person. So.
All right, thanks. And we'll go to Dr. Hilts now, and this is for Dr. Hilts and for Councilwoman Tucker. We'll switch gears a little bit, then we're going to come back to Norman to get into this issue of real estate and home ownership. But first I want to talk about something that we touched on briefly, and that's hair discrimination. And the impact of that can't be overstated, right? That there are schools and workplaces across our country that have dress codes that prohibit natural hairstyles like afros, braids, bantu knots, and locks. And these policies that criminalize natural hair have been used to justify the removal of Black children from classrooms and adults from employment. So what are your thoughts on these issues and the Crown Act and the need for legislation around banning race-based hair discrimination?
So Councilwoman Tucker is going to talk about the legislative component, and I'm going to give a little framework about the concept that, you've heard me talk about this before, the social determinants of health, but there are also the social determinants of inequality, the social determinants of equity, all the things that socially impact a group of people or an individual, whether it be hair or whether it be lack of resources or any of those things impacting an individual. This is just one of those examples of a group of people being discriminated against, and hair is just one example. And I'm going to give my personal experience, and then I'll let Councilwoman Tucker talk about the legislative component of that. But recently I explained to you all that I transitioned from the health department over to Valley Healthcare System, and I had a press conference at Valley Healthcare. And right before I had the press conference, I got braids in my hair. And looking to my family, they were watching the video saying, wow, the press conference went great. And my sister, who is in Nevada, who is a PhD, she's a curriculum instructor, she says, well, if I knew that you were going to be in the press conference, I wouldn't have put the braids in your hair. So now you're talking about a doctoral level person who teaches at the university level, who still has it programmed into her mind that if you're going to do something professional, you can't have braids in your hair. So we had some discourse about that. We talked about that, but she wasn't the only one in the family that had that comment. I'm just using her as an example because she would feel picked on if I just talked about her, right? But think about what that represents. So we know that braids are a part of our culture, and a lot of other things that have been said. Those of us who wear locks, I have 3 daughters and 2 of them have locks. My husband has locks. But think about the perception of this is what I want to wear. This is a part of my culture. And I love myself, but I have a whole community of people who don't love me or who will not allow me to have access to something or not allow me to have an opportunity because of it. So how does that, again, affect the individual? It affects mental health. It affects the way you present yourself. It affects the opportunities that you might go for. So overall, those are all the things that impact our health. So this is just one of those dynamics and something that we have to address if we want people to reach their full potential and not have limitations and have true equity.
Excellent, thank you for that. Councilwoman Tucker, the legislative component of this.
Right, so in reference to the numbers, say Crown Act by the numbers, 19 states have enacted the Crown Act or similar legislation. Georgia is not one of those states. 40 plus municipalities have enacted the Crown Act or similar legislations, and unfortunately Columbus is not, and I'm sorry, Mayor Henderson, I probably will be the person that will come to you and ask you to help me with this resolution. I know you looked at it like, so 30 states have pre-filed or filed or intend to introduce this legislation. And I'm listening to Dr. Hilts, and I'm thinking about my grandfather, who is in his 80s, former elected official, and I'm smiling because I took a photo with my natural curly hair, and he said, what is going on with your hair, young lady? I was like, what? Granddaddy, it look good. And he has me so self-conscious, but those are the things that we have to go through as Black women and also Black men, because you're always looked at, by your hair, and it's internally. It's from your own, people, because he came up in a time where wearing natural hair, for women really wasn't accepted. It was to get a relaxer, and I remember begging my mother and my grandmother for a relaxer, and I had, for the most part, pretty straight hair. And it was like, why do you want a relaxer? You need to embrace, but times were starting to change. Times were changing, and we are in that change. In the Air Force, I wouldn't dare wear my hair like this. I mean, I would be out of regulations, as they say. However, things are changing even in the military. They're starting to be able to wear different hairstyles, but my thing is I wanted to bring to your attention, and I know some of you have seen in the news, where we have our young boys who have locks, and they're in sporting activities, and a coach shaved a young man's locks off in order for him to participate in the sporting activity. As a parent, I would be livid. 1, it's expensive. 2, it's time to least your hair that long. But 3, you're telling me you don't accept my child? You don't accept my child and his hair? You know, if it's safety, you know, we can pull it back. You know, my daughter is in flag football. Woo, go the Chili Vikings. They won championship. And she's also, she's very athletic, basketball, but she pulls her hair, she makes sure it's safe as neat. But these are things we need to be more accepting. So I know a lot of times, you know, people say they want less government, but as Oz mentioned in reference to segregation, and I don't know if you all know, but even in Alabama, it was a school system that had went back, reverted to segregation. And now the federal government is having to step back in for that county. It happens. We need legislation at times to direct people to do the right thing, because sometimes, you know, as Norman said, we're not inherently good. We really are bad. I mean, that happened in the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve, we crossed the line. We are inherently bad. We really are. So sometimes we need some guidance, and that's what this Crown Act would do.
Thank you. And so I want to get to Norman here. We've got a little bit of time left, but we have to get to this issue of home buying. And then we do want to give the audience a chance to ask maybe 1 or 2 questions, but we're running short on time here. So Norman, there are numerous stories that illustrate home buyers experiencing different treatment from mortgage lenders based on race. What are your thoughts on how people of color are treated when buying a home?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of ways to tackle this. I'm sure, well, hopefully you are aware that there are still cases when it comes to the appraisal values of homes that people are experiencing issues. There are several cases out now where people have gone in and they have received a 40 to 60% decrease in value because of the way their homes were decorated, meaning their family photos, or maybe having African murals and things in their home. And then after removing those things, the appraisal value shoots up. In one case, the first appraisal value was received at $475,000 after receiving the second value of around $750,000. That's not even the same class of property. And so this is still happening. Another situation, and I know we're talking about home buying, and I'll be as quick as I can, but let's not forsake the rental market as well. So there is a recent case that was, they just wrapped everything up December of last year in Ashland, Alabama, where the housing authority and a private development company were indicted for racism or discrimination. And the case was they were steering African Americans away from a predominantly white neighborhood into a predominantly black community. And a lot of this stuff can go under wraps without being recognized. They went back and found that they found cases as early as 2012 and as recent as 2020. So a lot of this stuff was unfounded because people didn't have advocacy. They didn't know the right people to get in contact with. And one of their remedies is that they had to go back and contact over 145 African American applicants and add them to a waiting list. So these were applicants that were coming to apply for this housing community, and they would not put them on the wait list because they were steering them away from this white community. So this is happening around us. Coming to the advocacy part, if you are experiencing some type of discrimination when it comes to housing, or you think maybe a neighbor or someone you know, you can report this. You can report this to the Department of Justice. You can report this to the Housing and Urban Development Department. And just, it's one of these things of see something, say something. Yeah. Because they're tasked with looking into it, and you never know when you can step in and be an advocate for a person. It's better to say something about it and it be nothing than to say nothing at all and it be something. So it's still going on, unfortunately. There are great housing experiences that people are having, people of color are having. They are great advocates on the mortgage side. One of the things, and I'll be very brief with this, a covert that I think there needs to be some advocacy with. The amount of effort that someone puts in for someone who is either socioeconomically disadvantaged or challenged or different. They may put in twice the amount of effort in getting this person approved and looking at different codes that this person may qualify for, as opposed to somebody that they feel don't deserve that opportunity. And so we have to pay attention to not only the overt examples that we have, but covert examples that we have. And so what that looks like, advocacy looks like, is if you're working in one of these fields or working with somebody, make sure you check the person that's next to you, check your coworker and say, hey, look, make sure that you do a good job for this person. Don't write this person off just because they don't seem like they fit the bill, or maybe they talk funny or they don't talk properly, whatever the case may be. Make sure that you advocate for everyone the same exact way, because everyone deserves those opportunities.
So important, thank you. All right, we're coming to the very end here, but we will ask for a question from the audience if anyone has one. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Wanda Etienne out here with Troy University, and I wasn't born here in England. So, but I have lived here long enough to realize that when I first got here and I decided to vote here in Georgia, I was able to vote around the corner from my house at the local school. As time has gone on, there have been less and less places open for me to vote. We had a discussion about voter suppression, but everybody seems to want to brush that under the rug. Craziness has happened in my family. My granddaughter was unable to vote because they had her living at an address that her father lived at, but she never lived at. There's just been a whole lot of stuff going on to see if it can keep us to be able to comfortably vote. What are we going to do about that?
Okay, in reference to education, look, I'm not Nancy Bourne. So this is on Toyia Tucker, not even Councilwoman Toyia Tucker. But in reference to the schools, we shifted from the schools because of safety, number one. Number two, in reference to the locations. The equipment that is required takes a lot of electrical power, a lot of space, and therefore we have to ensure that we have the appropriate locations near, the people. We want to make sure that they're located, strategically located in the districts and your polling locations. So it's multiple reasons why that has occurred. But I will say this, and I promote voter education and voter registration wholeheartedly. Please check your voter registration. Not just right before it's time to vote. Check it annually. Make it your birthday present. When your birthday comes, check your voter registration. Sometimes we have to hold our own selves accountable. We have to, because we know at any time we can be removed from the voter rolls. We know at any time anything can happen. So definitely be proactive when it comes to your voter registration and voting. Be proactive. And what the city does that I do appreciate is we offer early voting. And we need to take advantage of early voting. We have multiple locations, Shirley B being one, the Citizen Service Center being another, Columbus Technical, College, and depending on, because we actually pay attention to how many people are voting. We look at the past, election cycles. So if our numbers are high and we see that we may need to add a new early voting location, we do, and we advocate, because I did it this year. So that happens, but take advantage of early voting. Check your registration on your birthday. Call your daughter. Tell her to check it out.
And I was very, very quickly, I would say, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to bring people to the polls. I'm the advisor to the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity on Columbus University. So those are college kids. A lot of them are not as engaged as we are as older people. And I really, make them go and vote because that's their right to vote. I personally took somebody to the poll. And I think that's what we all have to do. We need to all be engaged. And I tell them, I don't care who you vote for. I don't really care who you vote for. But it's your right to vote, and don't lose that right to exercise your right to vote.
That is a great last word for us. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you to all of you.